Tatters, her hand in that of Lord Tortemus, steps out of the eldritch portal and onto the deck of the Night Queen's shadow. She is aboard the flagship of the Third Guild, the very symbol of Queen Lilandra's court. This is a vessel out of legend, a tale told by mothers to scare their errant children and by sky sailors to scare one another. She reaches out for the rail, wary that her legs will betray her, and looks down on a city at war. Smoke rises from multiple fires, destruction scars cut into the city's face. Even from way up here, the sense of conflict is palpable. But they die as she sees who steps to either side of the vampire lord. The first is a compact, neatly dressed young woman, her dark hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail, a longsword sheathed at her hip. Her features are composed, her expression guarded. Like a stalking jungle cat, everything about the woman screams control, power, and danger. The second is almost her exact opposite, a wiry, spiked-haired woman in scruffy brown leathers with a broad grin on her face. She, too, carries a longsword, though in her case it is resting casually over one shoulder. Despite her relaxed posture, there is something in her languid movements that reveal her for the stone killer that she is. Tatters knows these two women. They are bodyguards, and two of the deadliest assassins alive. Their names are Mara and Lynn, the Vale sisters. Hello and welcome to The Lone Adventurer, an actual play solo RPG podcast with me, Carl White. I will be your narrator, your game master, and your guide as we follow our heroes on their journey into the unknown. For this game, I will be using the Chasing Adventure rule set, as well as a variety of other systems, tools, and tables as they take my fancy. A word of warning: the following scenes may contain mature themes and disturbing imagery. Listener discretion is advised. Adventure continues. Last time on The Lone Adventurer, Tatters encountered Lord Tortemus in the bowels of the Mustang and managed to survive the experience. Indeed, the vampire lord seemed distinctly interested in continuing their discussion. First, however, he had some pressing business to take care of. Summoning a mystic portal, Tortemus led Tatters through, leaving the Bluecoats to an uncertain fate. Now, it is time to see if her gamble has paid off. Will she be able to find an ally against the overwhelming forces arrayed against her? "Welcome back, boss," Lynn Vale drawls, seemingly completely relaxed, though her eyes never leave Tatters. "How did it go?" From behind her, a gigantic, lean-muscled feline bumps at her thigh with a low, throaty growl, and she reaches down affectionately to scratch Susan between its ears. The six-legged creature's tentacles, sprouting from between its shoulders and ending in vicious-looking spiked pads, wave contentedly in the air. Tortemus gives a tight smile. "The Bluecoats had been supplied by the army and proved a somewhat troublesome foe. No matter, though. The spectres are loosed and the exits are sealed. Kyros's finest will not last long, I fear. And see, my dears, we have an unexpected guest. All in all, a fine morning's work." Hands clasped behind her back, Mara Vale fixes Tatters with a penetrating gaze. "I recognize her. Tatiana Kamidev, the young arcanist affiliated with the Web. Demonologist, if reports are to be believed. At least, it looks like her." She glances at Tortemus. "Have you confirmed?" The vampire lord nods. Naturally, my gate carries a number of wards. Had she been unseen, you'd be mopping her from the deck. She is who she purports to be. All eyes turn to Tatters. The young arcanist finally recovers, though she can't deny she is firmly on the back foot. The last time the Vale sisters had been in play, she'd been piloting the Void Cutter, the web's battered old airship, in a desperate rescue bid, and had seen the two women snatched from mid-air by that same cat-like monstrosity that Lynn is, even now, tickling under the chin. She had assumed these two would be long dead by the hands of the very same vampire lord they now appear to serve. There's something else, though. Something important. The web had set out to capture the Vale sisters for a very particular purpose. Slate, the informant they had rescued from Ironhook Prison and head of the Wraith Street Gang, had suggested to the Spider, in no uncertain terms, that the Vale sisters were agents of the unseen. Which, on the face of it, means that she has made a terrible miscalculation and is in deep, deep trouble. But that can't be right. It doesn't square with the facts or with what Mara Vale and Tortemus just said. Something deeper is at play here, but she can't say what. She becomes aware that the silence is growing uncomfortable. Time to roll the dice. She nods a perfunctory greeting to each of the Vale sisters, then meets the vampire's gaze. Oh, my, she thinks, as her knees threaten to betray her a second time. Maybe don't look into his eyes. My Lord Tortemus, you know that the web are sworn in opposition to the unseen conspiracy. I believe we are aligned in that goal, and I propose a pooling of resources, a sharing of information. You said you were willing to speak. Well, what do you have to say? Welcome back, gentle listener, to this, by my count, the 50th chapter in our story, and the midpoint in Series 3. As I mentioned last time, one of the goals for this session was to stress test my new NPC behavior tool, OCEANIC. And I got more than I'd bargained for when Mythic informed me that this scene would be altered, and the way it would be altered was to add a character. Now, I began this latest run of episodes with some game principles noted down, and one of them was to tie prompts back to existing threads and NPCs. This is intended to keep the story from becoming too sprawling, although with 8 PCs, 30 or so NPCs, a machine cult terrorist campaign, a civil war, a planned political coup, an imminent genocidal bombing campaign, the risk of demon incursion, a global shape-shifting infiltration, and towers built by ancient godlike beings in the process of waking up and threatening to destroy the world, I'm not sure how successful that anti-sprawl tactic has proven. Regardless, I decided that whoever this added character would be, it had to be someone we had already met. And my oracle informed me that it was in fact the Vale sisters. Both of them. This gave me the opportunity to create the sisters in OCEANIC, and because we've not really interacted with them much, I decided to use the tool to randomize their personalities, even though I had previously generated them using another tool back in Series 2, Episode 3. There were some interesting results, some of which I used to inform their appearance and their behavior, and some of which may crop up in future play. If you want to check out their stats, details are in the show notes. But Tortemus was the star of the show here, and so I turned to my newly built OCEANIC Behavior Oracle, custom built in perchance to give it a test drive, and to see what he had to say for himself. First up, he rolled 0 trait matches and 1 6. That meant that whatever he talked about, it was not linked to a trait, and was fairly inconsequential. My Mythic 2e prompt was Happy, Fortunate, which I interpreted as the vampire boss celebrating his win. And because he was so pleased with himself, I figured that his core disposition score, which I'd already planned to increase by 1, would increase by 2. Next, I had Mara make an interjection, which I felt was in keeping with her cautious personality. And then I got to roleplay Tatters, who posed her question, would Tortemus play ball? Why don't we find out? A shadow crosses Tortemus's features, fleeting but unmistakable. He is hard to read, but Tatters gets the distinct impression he is hiding something. Pain? Sorrow? Not what she'd been expecting to see, certainly. A pooling of resources, you say? The vampire looks her up and down, and there is none of that swiftly concealed emotion evident when he speaks. Only an amused, faintly mocking smile on his lips. Let us assume for a moment that matters were as you describe. I would say that the resources of the web are, at present, somewhat diminished. While my own... He spreads his arms wide, displaying the majesty of the Night Queen's shadow, the vessel that even now hangs directly above Kairos, but that somehow seems to attract no attention whatsoever to the combatants tearing the city apart below. What might you have to contribute to such a partnership? Tatters is burning with questions, desperate for answers, but she knows all too keenly that when you have a bad hand, it's best to play it well. My lord, you know as well as I that in such situations, knowledge is power. And while you appear to have managed to cloak an entire skyship filled with vampires above a city intent upon your extermination, I'm willing to wager that there is a great deal you don't know that I do. And while you could, I am sure, extract that knowledge from me by force, I'm equally willing to wager that you won't. Tortemus raises an insouciant eyebrow. Is that so? And why might that be, pray tell? Because, my lord, it's plain to anyone with eyes to see that you need every ally you can get. The fact that you hired Mara and Lynn here rather than turn them into witless spawn attests to that. From all around her, witless spawn hiss their displeasure. Tortemus cuts his vampire crew off dead with a glance. Like cockroaches fleeing sudden light, they fade back into the shadows. Fighting down her terror, Tatters continues. And beyond what I know, I'm not without power of my own, as I'm sure you're aware. No doubt you could best me, but at what price? Surely it's better that we join forces against a mutual foe than squander allies when they present themselves, don't you think? So, I ask you again, what do you say? The Vale sisters glance at one another, and Tatters thinks she detects suppressed smiles. Tortemus's head bows, conceding the point. When he raises his eyes to hers, the studied indifference is gone. In its place is something altogether more honest and vulnerable. A sense of isolation so profound she is forced to look away. Behave, knees. You play the game well, Miss Kamidev, the vampire concedes, and Tatters wonders briefly if the monster has read her mind. You are not mistaken. We do share a common enemy, and I do value strong allies. I accept your offer. Come, let us make ourselves comfortable. We have a great deal to discuss. Well played indeed, Tatters. Good for you. An alliance secured, and hopefully some insight into the machinations of the unseen to come. Good work. Let's see how we got there. In response to Tatters' challenge, Tortemus rolled 2 matches on the NPC Behavior Oracle, one against his extroversion and another against his neuroticism, with keywords of triumphant and large. Neuroticism is the only significant trait here with a score of 4, and it indicates moodiness, sensitivity, and anxiety. That, it seemed to me, indicated some grandstanding on the vampire's part, but it also suggested Tatters would get a slight glimpse of the man behind the mask. Next, I had a choice. I could have had Tatters make a compel move here, which would have been the more mechanically appropriate thing to do, but much as in a multiplayer game, there is some leeway when running role-playing encounters. As a GM, you can certainly ask for a roll and let the dice fall where they may, but often it's more fun to let the role-playing take over. Some discussion back and forth between player and GM, with the outcome emerging directly from their jointly established fiction. In this case, I made Tatters' argument, which felt pretty strong to me, and then turned to my OCEANIC behaviour generator to see what the vampire's response would be. Tortemus rolled 2 matches again, and the important one here was Openness. This decision played directly into his pronounced sense of adventurousness. The keywords this time were defiant and lonely, and when combined with a question of the Oracle, I had my answer. A deal was struck. Thus far, I'm enjoying the gameplay loop created by this NPC behaviour tool. It needs plenty more playtesting to see how it bears up, and no doubt will need some tweaking to become best it can be, but for now it seems to be performing its intended function pretty well. The creation of tools such as OCEANIC, along with the custom perchance oracles I've built along the way, has been an unanticipated bonus of playing this solo campaign. The solo gamer's toolkit should forever be evolving, adapting to match the specific requirements of any given game at any given moment, which is something I don't think I'd fully appreciated until recently. Unleashing creativity was one of the goals of playing this campaign, in terms of story creation and storytelling. I hadn't realised that creativity would also involve building some of the scaffolding that would support the narrative creation process. But enough introspection. Let's get back to our tale. What does this deal mean? And what will Tatters learn from this hard-won alliance? Why don't we find out? Asking herself, not for the first time, what she has got herself into, Tatters takes a seat. Tortemus's quarters are predictably grand, effortlessly exuding that understated aura of sophistication and power that only extraordinary wealth can create. Dark, polished mahogany panelling lines the walls, inset with intricate carvings of what Tatters presumes must be events from vampire lore. Shelves filled with ancient tomes line another wall, alongside an extensive collection of fine wines. No, not wines, Tatters realizes with a shudder as she looks closer. Rare blood vintages. The scent of leather, old paper, and the hint of something altogether darker permeates the air. Tortemus, with Mara and Lynn standing behind him, takes a seat behind a large, ornate desk crafted from the same dark wood, littered with maps and papers. He smiles and spreads his perfectly manicured hands. So, where shall we begin? The exchange of information lasts for some time, and before they're done, Tatters has learned a great deal. The unseen were even more powerful than she had realized. They had attempted, unsuccessfully to hear Tortemus tell it, to infiltrate the Third Guild. Although this attempt had been prevented, it had opened the Night Queen's eyes to the extent of unseen infiltration. Their tendrils, it seemed, extended through power structures across the chained world. One of those power structures had been the mercenary army, the Silver Nails. Sereth Pinto, their leader, had been replaced by an unseen shape-changer, a fact that the Undying had learned from none other than the Whisperer himself, prior to his death. Unbeknownst to Pinto, and also to the Unseen, the Whisperer had had agents at the heart of the Silver Nails, namely, the Vale sisters. It had been Mara and Lynn who had realized the infiltration was underway, and who had alerted the Spymaster. In turn, the Whisperer had offered the Night Queen a means to both strike back against the Unseen and secure a powerful private army into the bargain. That likely explains the intel Slate had given them, Tatters reflects. Though, in incomplete, his information about a link between the unseen and the Vale sisters had at least been partially accurate. Lord Tortemus is thankfully quite phlegmatic about the loss of both the Mustang and the majority of that private army in the ensuing chaos. Regrettable, but these things happen. A shame we could not have exchanged information sooner. We might have saved one another a great deal of trouble. Regardless, we are where we are. They are almost up to date when discussion turns to the attack on the Opera House. I remain mystified by this new power the machine cult has brought to bear, Tortemus frowns, leaning back in his chair. Your insight into the source of the infernal powder is invaluable, but it does not explain their new ice weapon. How could they have developed such a device? I think I can answer that, Tatters replies. I was scrying on the Whisperer's agent, Mina Montesario, when she encountered the pipe runner leader in the underpipes, a woman named Uma Jukti. That woman wore a pale gold ring that allowed her to control temperature and to summon ice. I lost that scrying contact soon after, but I understand that Jukti was slain. Perhaps the cult got it from her. Tortemus's eyes widen, and he stands abruptly, and then moves faster than Tatters can follow to the bookshelf, and then back to her side. He points at an open page, his face grave. This ring, did it look anything like this? The young Arcanist nods. Yes, that's it exactly. What is it? The Ring of Winter. An ancient, powerful artifact, and one that changes matter significantly. It is said to contain a malevolent sentience, one that can overwhelm the weak-minded. Given free rein, the ring has but one goal: eternal winter. It would seek to plunge this world into a never-ending ice age, one that few would survive. Tatters groans. Oh, that's just great. Like we don't have enough to deal with. She feels exhausted, the immense weight of the past few days bearing down on her. She's not sure how much more of this she can take. Lost, deep in thought, Lord Tortemus doesn't appear to notice. This presents us with something of a dilemma. Naturally, my plans must continue uninterrupted, and my forces are already committed. But the ring represents a new and powerful threat that I had not accounted for. And perhaps an opportunity. I think there is only one thing for it. Mara, Lynn, I will need you to accompany Miss Kamadev in a mission to recover the ring. I took a slightly different approach to this scene, asking my yes-no oracle a repeated question: does Tatters learn anything new? For each yes, I generated a description from the oracle, interpreted it, and then asked my question again. You can see the details of the prompts and how I interpreted them in the show notes if you're interested. This continued until at last I got an exceptional no. Something had brought the information exchange to a screeching halt. And that something, my oracle informed me, was innocently cold. The first thing that came to mind when considering that prompt was the Ring of Winter, and the innocently part of it suggested to me that Tortemus had been in the dark about its presence up until now. Once he discovered the truth, there were more pressing matters to do than continue the discussion. The fact that he was pushed to act with such urgency suggested that he knew what the ring was and how dangerous it might be in the hands of the machine cult. And so, after an episode of comparative rest and reflection, we're all set up for our next caper. A quest for a ring. Simple and classic. I've decided not to give Tatters the opportunity to take the settle-in move at this point, even though that would let her level up, and even though, narratively, I absolutely could have. Incidentally, that means that I didn't make a single chasing adventure move this whole session. This was pure roleplay between me and my virtual GM, which I find a nice change of pace from time to time. It's good to slow things down occasionally, to get off the clock and just explore. That aside, Here's my reasoning for that decision not to settle in. Chasing Adventure has a mechanism called ominous forces, which serves a twin purpose. On the one hand, it provides a tool for the GM to map out the upcoming dangers in the world, and on the other, it serves to make the players push themselves to their limits, at the risk of those ominous forces advancing each time they settle in. There is a problem, however, with ominous forces in a solo game, at least the way I prefer to play solo games. As you'll likely be aware, I like to play with a truly emergent narrative. Just as if I were a player in a real-life GM's campaign, I want to start the game with very little idea about the secrets of the world or where my story will take me. I want surprises, and to get them, I want to leave the GMing wholly to the whims of my GM emulator. The ominous forces mechanic doesn't seem to quite fit with that approach for me. It supposes that the solo player will have a level of knowledge that the traditional player in a game with an actual GM wouldn't have. As a solo player, I have the option to drop the ominous forces mechanic completely. However, I see a snag with doing this. The ominous forces mechanic is baked into the settle-in move, as well as to the crumble move that takes place when a PC marks their fifth and final condition. The tension between, on the one hand, pushing the PC to their limits to prevent bad things happening in the world, and on the other, recovering before you crumble and perhaps leveling up, seems a fairly vital one in Chasing Adventure. As it stands, I'm not quite sure how to tackle that dilemma. And given that Tatters only has one condition currently marked, I think I can reasonably put it off for now, and spend a bit more time thinking about the best way to address it. I should mention that this problem is only a problem because of the way I prefer to play solo RPGs. Part of the process of playing a solo RPG is to discover what works best for you, and what you enjoy. To each his own. For me, I've discovered over time that I like to be kept in the dark about the progress of the world's threats, and for challenges to be procedurally generated rather than mapped out in advance. Another thing I've settled on is the way I assemble my tools for solo RPGs. Some folks prefer the analog route: a pencil, a journal, a paper character sheet, dice, perhaps some cards. And for certain games, I love that format too. Playing the evocative journaling game 1000-Year-Old Vampire by candlelight, scribbling in scarlet ink in a leather-bound journal with a heavy fountain pen, hugely leans into the mood and the feel of that game. But for this game, with its constantly expanding and intersecting web of plot lines, I find digital tools work best for me. I've mentioned Notion previously, as well as Perchance. These two have sprawled. When I sit down to write The Lone Adventurer, I have no less than 5 Perchance web pages I have open, as well as 2 Notion pages and my Google Docs folder. In order to just jump straight in each time, I created a small batch file, the code for which is in the show notes, and that launches all of those pages with just one double click. Anything to remove friction and get me straight to where the fun is. But my workflow is likely to be very different from the next person's, and theirs from the next. The message from all of this, if there is one, is you do you. Anyway, we have a quest to undertake. We have a party to get to know. Let's see how things pan out. Next time. You have been listening to The Lone Adventurer, a solo RPG podcast played, written, and performed by me, Carl White. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider telling your friends about it or leaving a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. It really is a huge help. You can email me at theloneadv@gmail.com or follow my blog at carlillustration.wordpress.com. You can find show notes for this episode and all the others at theloneadventurer.podbean.com, where I include any links mentioned in the episode, as well as mechanics information. I also include a link to a full episode transcript. The story will continue in the next episode of The Lone Adventurer. Thank you for listening.